Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure for Christ Church to welcome James and Demia Causey here this morning, to have them join us for worship and this interesting forum. James
problem.
Causey,
Mississippi is America's problem.
Many as you know.
Because if
You didn't know I was a ventriloquist, did you? James Causey is an award-winning projects writer for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and he's been a professional journalist for over 30 years. Recognition of his work has been widespread. He's received numerous fellowships, including from Harvard and Marquette, where he worked on the project Milwaukee's Promise, which looked for solutions to Milwaukee's eviction, housing, black male teacher shortage, mentoring shortage, and racism issues. After returning from his fellowship at Harvard, James joined the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel editorial board as a columnist in 2008. And since 2015, he has co-hosted Black Nouveau on PBS, for which he won an Emmy. If I went through even a partial list of all James Causey's awards, I'd be talking for so long there wouldn't be any time left for him to say anything. So I'll just give you a quick flavor of his work. His 2018 award-winning USC Annenberg Center for Health Journalism Fellowship project, Cultivating a Community, was a narrative vessel on a community garden in 53206 that mentors teen boys besieged by trauma and the constant threat of violence. His 2017 project, What Happened to Us, tackled big issues such as the high incarceration rates for African American males by telling the story of what happened to fellow students in his 1978 third grade class. Today, James will speak to us about a failed promise. Without further words from me, my friends, let's welcome James Causey.
First of all, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, awesome. It's an honor to be here before you today. And I just want to say thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting my wife. If anything goes bad, you could blame her. She put the PowerPoint together. But I'm here to try to squeeze talking about one of my projects that took a week. It's a week-long project that I worked on. I'm gonna try to squeeze that into 40 minutes. So I'm gonna do the best I can. So it's almost impossible to do, but I'm gonna do my best. So the idea for my project that I'm gonna be talking about today came about from past projects that were mentioned today, mostly Cultivating a Community, which took a look at this urban garden started by Andre Lee Ellis on a corner of 9th and Ring Street. I don't know how many of you read that. Please nod your head. Even if you didn't read it, just nod your head. It makes me feel good. But in that project, what I wanted to do was spend some time in this area and see how our urban garden, a garden on the corner of 9th and Ring, one of the roughest areas in the city, could be a place for love, a place for men and young boys to come together to teach them how to cope with the violence that they see on a daily basis, as well as, in the words of Andre Lee Ellis, get them to take their hands off of guns and stealing cars and put their hands into the soil so that they could be productive citizens. So what I wanted to do with this failed promise idea was take a look at past projects that I worked on and try to sum it all up into one big project, a solutions-based project. So before I go any further, I just got word today that Andre Lee Ellis, a man who I love, he's like a father figure to so many. He just got out of the hospital after suffering a diabetic episode. So if you could keep him in your prayers, please do. One thing that Andre showed me, and I sort of seen this from working with young people, if you put a bunch, like 100 black boys in a room from that area, and you said, by a show of hands, how many of you know your father? maybe 50 hands would go up. But if you said to these same 100 boys, how many of you have a good relationship with your dad? Maybe about 20 hands would go up. If you raise the question of how many of you know someone who graduated from college, maybe about 10 to 15 hands would go up. But if you say, how many of you know someone who lost their life or have been injured due to gun violence, you'll probably get 100 hands that go up. That's the problem that we have in our society. You know, what I learned from being in that garden is that a lot of these boys have been to more funerals than graduations. And that's sad, that's trauma. And a lot of them have experienced a lot of trauma. So when I came up with this idea for looking at how we address some of the issues that I'm going to talk about today, there's a vast amount of issues that impact poor people and people of color in Milwaukee. Just to tell you a little bit more about myself, I grew up just blocks away from where that urban garden is located. My parents, when they made the Great Migration north, my father lived on 9th Street, and my mother was living in Chicago at the time, and he asked her to marry him. And she said, no, I can't marry you, you don't have anything, you know. So he got this nice apartment on 9th Street, and he convinced her, he asked her 3 times to marry him. She finally did. She left Chicago, moved to Milwaukee. She was living in Milwaukee 1 week and got robbed on a bus stop, and she hated Milwaukee ever since. And she blamed my father for that. So, but in a nutshell, let me dive into this project. First of all, let me just say this. There isn't a problem with the black community. There's a problem with a lack of resources that exists in the black community. I even hate the term black community, because if we want to be real about this, shouldn't we all be like a melting pot? I mean, you know, we refer to things as the black church, the black community, and things like that, but that just kind of irks me. And it should irk you too, because really, if we really want to solve a lot of our problems, nobody could solve their problems on their own. We like to say that, but I often tell my wife this, that we try to get the people with the least amount of resources to do the most work to solve their problems, and that shouldn't take place. But anyway, let me get into this project, or else I never get done with it. So I would say this. This is Whitefish Bay, right? Whitefish Bay area. I would say this. If the same problems that exist in certain areas of Milwaukee would exist here if you did the following. If you take the best kids, if you take the best kids out of the neighborhood and ship them out to another neighborhood, if you cut family supporting jobs, and what I mean by family supporting jobs, I'm talking about the jobs where you could really support your family off of. If you took those out of the neighborhood, if you reduced transportation options, if you fixed it so like 70 to 80% of the people there make below $40,000 a year, if you cut the marriage rate to about 30%, if you over-police this area, meaning that if you just happen to be driving and you fail to hit the signal light, you get stopped by a cop and he said, do you live around here? Where are you going? What you doing? And all this kind of stuff, and they make you feel like a criminal. And also, if you racially profile anybody that's not from this area every single time they go someplace, you will have parts of Milwaukee. So just let that sink in a little bit. In my project, I use Fannie Lou Hamer as a backdrop. And Fannie Lou Hamer, who, honestly, I didn't know who she was, and I heard about her, but I didn't really know who she was until my wife introduced me to Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer was this woman who made this speech saying, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And she made this speech about 58 years ago. She became a leader of the Freedom Democratic Party. And in 1964, she said this, and I'm going to quote her, for 300 years, we've given them time, and we've been tired so long, and I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. She made this speech right before, actually, Malcolm X opened up for her, and she made this speech. And it's so profound because she was just tired of so many things. She was tired of the lack of decent employment opportunities available to people of color. She was tired of the brutality of law enforcement officers that they unleashed on black people. She was beaten behind bars by a police officer. She was tired of the segregation used to ensure that widen the economic gaps between jobs and education and things like that. And she was mostly sick and tired of politicians giving excuse after excuse of why they won't address these issues. I'm sick and tired today, and you should be too, of a lot of issues that exist. So I used her as a backdrop after my wife informed me of who she really was. And I said, man, those same issues that she talked about still exist today. So what I wanted to do when you craft a project, when you start thinking about how you put it together, it doesn't really, it's really a difficult process. You do outlines, you have conversations with people. I talk to my wife to death about some of the issues. And I wanted to tackle four main things. I wanted to tackle the issue of livable wage jobs, housing, education, and racism. Big issues, right? And I'm, you know, as a reporter, when you tackle something like this, you want to tackle it in a different way and different form. So first, let's tackle the issue of livable wage jobs. Now, a reporter friend of mine, Jamal Abdul-Alim, once told me, he said, James, if they don't have anybody running for mayor or alderman or something like that, they should have a plan for the old A.O. Smith site. If they don't have a plan for that, then they probably shouldn't be running. I'm like, I agree with that. Why? Because A.O. Smith, which is roughly less than a mile away from where I live, in the 1970s, 5,000 men and women worked at this site. It was fantastic. They built, those are car frames if you don't know. They made car frames for like 60 or 70% of the cars that were being driven around the country at the time. And the way I would judge how A.O. Smith was doing is because when I was younger, the frames would be piled so high they looked like Tinker Toys, right? But as they started cutting jobs and moving jobs overseas and to Mexico and places like that, the frames got lower and lower till they ultimately disappeared. So after A.O. Smith eventually became nothing, I could see the changes happening in my neighborhood, bless you. I grew up on 39th and Capitol after my parents purchased their first home. I went from a school that was named La Follette, that was pretty much all black, to a school that was very diverse called Samuel Clemens, that was off of Hope Street. I would just walk to school every day, and I would see some men in the morning carrying their lunch pails walking to A.O. Smith. And I was like, hey, how you doing? And they were like, hey, man. And they would have on their clothes and their duckies and things like that. And it was good seeing these men walk to work, right? They were homeowners. They built their homes. They invested in their homes. It was a very diverse neighborhood. This was third grade. This was me in 1978. By the time I got to sixth grade, my school went from being very diverse. I experienced this thing called white flight. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but everybody in my neighborhood that was white pretty much left. And the homes, renters started to move in, homes started to go down in value. And I noticed that when I was starting in third grade, my class was roughly 50-50, blacks to whites. By the time I graduated in sixth grade, there was one white student in there, Scott Bender. I'll never forget him. He was like one of my best friends. I liked him because he had a dog, and I always begged my parents to get me a dog, and they never got me one. But I would go to Scott Bender's house, and Scott Bender and his mom, he came from a single-family household, so she couldn't afford to move, so that's why she stayed. But when these type of manufacturing jobs left, it created a major void in the black community because the A.L. Smiths of the world, you didn't have to have like these major manufacturing skills to get this job. You know, I had uncles who worked here, who came from the South, and they were able to purchase a home, purchase a house, start a family, save a little money for their kids to go to school. It was great times. So when people say, when was the best times to be black in Milwaukee? It was around this time. Because A.O. Smith was like a feeder to the entire community. That's when Capitol Court was booming. Because think about it, these men had disposable income, right? So they could afford to pay for a house, pay for a car, go out to eat. They could afford to have a little fun, buy suits, buy clothes, do shopping. All these things that you think about, and it created this, like, it spread throughout the community. We had better restaurants in our neighborhood. We had all these booming things. So when A.O. Smith started to fail, the community started to fall. Capitol Court became Midtown, in which nobody goes there now hardly. And you started to see a rise in crime and things like that. There was a plan to, by the way, at A.O. Smith's site now, it's owned by the city. They cleaned it up. Next slide. It's called Century City. And it looks fantastic, right? They got new buildings there, but they have nobody that really works there. I think they have less than 100 employees that work in this area. And this site is humongous. It's huge. It's plenty of space to do a lot of things there. So it was so much space to do something there that Strauss wanted to move their meatpacking plant here, right? And bring 250 jobs. I thought it was a great idea because those are the same type of jobs that could be livable wage jobs, you know, and a lot of people in my neighborhood and in that area needs jobs. And I thought it was fantastic, but what happened? People from the outside came in and said, that's a slaughterhouse. We don't want a slaughterhouse there. People that did not even live in my community were telling people and aldermen and people like that that they didn't want those jobs there. So when you kill an idea, the idea was killed. Strauss was told, we don't want your business here. When you kill an idea, you better have a better one as a backup plan. That's my idea. The city didn't have one. There was no backup plan, right? So now it just pretty much sits there empty, but I have a plan, and I want you to listen to this. So, you know, we get compared to a lot of cities. We get compared to Detroit, Cleveland, sometimes Chicago and places like that. Well, I kind of want us to be more like Cleveland right now when I tell you about this idea. Cleveland came up with this idea called a Cleveland Cooperative. Like Milwaukee, they lost half of their manufacturing jobs from 1978 to 2000. But Cleveland chose an enterprising solution by zeroing in on neighborhoods that had high employment and crime. The program that puts those with barriers in criminal history and spotty employment records, it gave them a chance to work. This effort centered around large-scale institutions that could not afford to move. So the university that could not move and take their jobs overseas, University Hospital could not leave, Cleveland Clinic could not leave. So what these companies were doing, they had like $3 billion of purchasing power, right? So Cleveland Clinic, Cleveland hospitals, and places like that, what do they need? They need their laundry done, right? So instead of shipping their laundry to outside of Cleveland to get it done, what they decided to do is like, what if we took a portion of that $3 billion in purchasing power that we had and purchased a laundry facility and then train people how to work there, pay them a livable wage, and on top of that, hey, I got a better idea. Turn them into homeowners. Turn them into homeowners. That's a good idea. It'll stabilize the communities that are suffering, and it'll make them more vested to stay and keep this job. A cooperative type idea, right? That's genius, right? Think about it. You say you can't find work, you say you got some bumps in the road, you may have committed a few crimes, you served your time and stuff like that, nobody wants to give you a shot, I'm gonna give you a shot. I want you to work at this laundry facility. We're gonna pay you about $18 to $20 an hour to start. If you stick it out, we'll pay you even more. And that house that's like down the street, we'll help you get into that house. But you know what? We're not gonna even make you wait. we'll put you in that house right now. Your family could move there right now. You don't need a down payment, but we'll just take a portion of your salary and put it in that home. Why can't we do that? Why can't we do that? Not only did they come up with an idea for a laundry facility, they came up with a greenhouse as well, which is fantastic. This greenhouse is gigantic, and this is what it looks like. It's like 3 football fields, right? Think about the weather in Cleveland. It's just like Wisconsin. After, what month is this? October? It's October, right? So after October, you don't really grow lettuce anymore in Wisconsin, right? You don't grow any vegetables or anything like that. Food comes from California and Florida and places like that, and it's trucked in, right? So what they do is they train people to work in this greenhouse, and the lettuce that's made in this greenhouse, it supplies all the restaurants in Cleveland. It supplies the schools, the school systems. It supplies the hospitals and all those kind of things. So it's like, man, we're getting the benefit, and we don't have to truck all this stuff in, and it saves on the carbon footprint for one thing. You know, we should all want that. And then they also built a solar power facility plant. That's more technical, and so you could start at this job and move up to the solar panel facility and make even more money, right? And so the solar panel thing is really cool because the people who make the solar panels, they put the solar panels on the schools. They put the solar panels on the hospitals. They put the solar panels on the home, so it keeps regenerating itself. So I said, this is a great idea. I wrote about it. The Common Council said, that's a great idea. We're going to all sign our names and say, this is a great idea. So they pretty much took my article, put it into a proclamation. Everybody signed it. And today, this was in 2017, nothing. I was told, where's that money going to come from? It only costs $160,000 to get this program started, right? That's nothing. If the city can't afford $160,000, then we got bigger problems to worry about, right? So that's what I'm going to say about that. I could say a lot more, but we don't have time for me to scream and go off, and I know we don't allow cursing in the church, so. But those are the problems that we have in Milwaukee, and I'm going to give you a little homework assignment after this talk. So let's move on to housing. So we all know housing is a big issue in the city. Housing is important to stabilizing communities, and we know that students perform better when they know that they have a roof over their heads and they're doing well. I did well. A lot of kids I went to school with did well and all that kind of stuff just because they had stable housing. In 1970, a year after I was born, Milwaukee's black homeownership rate was 33%. Think about it. That's 2 years after the Fair Housing Law passed, right? 2 years after the mandatory federal housing law passed. It was 33%. Today, it's 27.8%. How did we go backwards? I'm going to tell you how we went backwards. Milwaukee is nearly as segregated as it was in 1970. One of the main reasons that we have more black people buying homes is that wages are too low. From 2014 to 2018, only 17.4% of black men and 14.6% of black women in the 4-county Milwaukee County area made more than $40,000. So just to reverse that, that means, I'm not a great math person, but roughly 70% of black people living in Milwaukee make under $40,000 a year. You can't buy a house with that. So wages need to come up. And we could talk about minimum wage still being $7.25 an hour, but that's absolutely insane. You could work 80 hours, so you could work 2 jobs making $7.25 an hour for 80 hours a week. Yeah. And you still can't afford an apartment in Milwaukee, which typically runs around $1,400 a month if you want to stay in a safe area. So those are some of the issues, but black home ownership in Milwaukee has never been above 50%, ever. And that's an embarrassment, and that's something that should be addressed. Many of my friends that I grew up with never owned a home and probably never will, especially with rent prices being close to $1,400 a month in the city. But I have a solution for that, another solution. Habitat for Humanities. Now, Milwaukee has a great Habitat for Humanities program. I love it. I love the people. I love the work they did. I've actually volunteered and done some work for Habitat. But this is the problem I have with our local Habitat for Humanities. We have a block-by-block approach, right? So say they want to build in Washington Heights, right? Which is a nice area. Everybody has to live within that 1 block or 2 blocks that they're building. The Twin Cities Habitat, which I went there to see what they do, which makes them so different than anyone else, you could live anywhere. You can build a home anywhere. So imagine this. Instead of living in Washington Heights, you could probably build a home here, right down the street. You could build a home closer to where you work. You could build a home closer to where your kids go to school, if you want to go to, want your kids to be in a better school. You could build a home in the burbs. Maybe you don't like that. Maybe you like the city. Maybe you want to be downtown. But they allow you to build your home anywhere within that Twin Cities area. I mentioned that idea to the local Habitat. They're like, that's a great idea, James, but it probably won't work. Let me tell you why it won't work. Well, we have a Habitat for Humanities in Cedarburg, a Habitat for Humanities in Racine, a Habitat for Humanities in Waukesha, a Habitat for Humanities all these other places, and they all have CEOs. That means some people will have to give up their positions of power. Who wants to do that? I don't want to give up my title. I like my title. I like building my 10 homes a year. And I don't want to give that up. I'm making a lot of money. If you had one CEO in an umbrella type program that allowed people to build and live anywhere, that would address our segregation problem, for one thing, because I'm pretty sure some black people want to live in other areas. You may not want to live in Washington Heights. You may not want to live on this block. And I guess my main problem with Habitat locally is that when they do build, they typically build in an area that's on a tipping pot. It may go good. We're hoping it don't fail, but we need you guys who are new homeowners to step in and be that stabilizing force. So you're asking first-time homeowners, a lot of people who are younger, may have children, maybe single moms, to be that stabilizing force in a neighborhood that's on a tipping point. I don't know if that's a good idea or not. I just leave that up to you guys. But I mentioned this idea as a plan to move forward, and nothing. You're going to hear this as a common theme. We have a lot of great ideas that we often give to politicians, and what do they do with it? It's a good idea. We'll sign a proclamation. They quick to sign a proclamation. They're like, give me a pen. Where do I sign? Okay. And then they like to do this with it, too. We all signed it. But then it goes nowhere. And again, I'm going to give you a homework assignment to tell you how to address that. So I talked about things that cost money to address. Let me talk about something that doesn't really cost a whole lot of money. It's actually sweat equity. So tackling the issue of education is a huge issue. I call Dr. Howard Fuller probably the smartest person on education that I know, and he's world-renowned. And I said, Dr. Fuller, I really want to tackle the issue of education in my project. He's like, good luck with that, James. He's like, it's so many different things out there that's out there, what you going to come up with? So I came up with this idea about reading. And I'm going to tell you why. We all know reading is important. But let me just give you some stats. Fewer than 4 out of every 10 Wisconsin students are proficient in reading in the 2018-2019 school year. It's probably gotten worse since COVID. While the gap between black students and white students is well documented, Milwaukee had the 3rd largest such gap nationwide for 4th grade readers. It's not much better for 8th grade readers. Bottom line, every child must be proficient in reading so they could live productive lives. And why does this matter? Because the reading gap matters because for every student who does not complete high school, the cost of society is estimated at $260,000 in lost earnings. Look, there's no magic bullet to reading, you know. I'm old enough to remember when, you know, there was commercials out when people used to do this and read and flip the pages and all that kind of stuff. There's no magic bullet to reading. The only way that you improve in reading is to read and to have people who understand reading read to you. So I met Michael Pratt. He's not up here. Michael Pratt is my frat brother. He's a Sigma man. And he's the son of Marvin Pratt, the first black mayor of Milwaukee, who was also the Common Council president. Michael Pratt, mother was a librarian, very smart, intelligent man. He moved to Nashville, and he became an assistant principal in Nashville. And the same problems with reading here, he discovered that they had there. And so he started talking to boys. He would always carry a book around, be reading books, trying to get kids interested in, like, hey, Mr. Pratt, what are you reading? And he would tell them. Then he would say, how come you're not reading a book? And so kids would give him all kinds of reasons as to why they're not reading. I don't really like reading that much. I can't find anything I really like to read. I'd rather watch a movie than read. I only read because I have to. But then he got even deeper. He said, well, I want to know what the problem is. Why don't you read? The problem with not reading and what he discovered, and it's very simple. They didn't see black men reading. You emulate what you see. You know, I got to admit, my father wasn't a big reader. You know, my father struggled with reading, and he would always do this. He was like, hey, this letter came in the mail. Why don't you read it so I could get the full understanding of it? That's how he would do it, you know. And then when I discovered that he was a poor reader, you know, I wasn't embarrassed by it, but I understood it. My father, went to Korea at like the age of 17. He was a baby. And, you know, he always struggled with education. But my father was a welder, and he was able to buy a house due to the welding career that he had because they taught him on the job. But getting back to the point, he discovered that a lot of these boys didn't see other black men reading, so he's like, I need to change that. So called up his frat brothers and said, hey, I want to start a reading program. We're going to go into the schools and read. Are you down? You going to help me? They was like, yeah, we'll do it. We wear our fraternity stuff like that and all this kind of stuff. We'd go into schools and read and stuff like that. He's like, that's a great idea. He started calling up the schools, say, hey, I got this black man reading program. We want to come into the schools and read. Nah, we need to vet the men who coming in. We need to do this. Who are these men? You know, we have our own programs in place. They gave him excuse after excuse. He just wants to bring men into the school and read to kids, right? Nobody wanted to do it. So he found this school called Buena Vista in Nashville. Buena Vista is a strange school. It's located right across the street from a housing project, right? And most of the kids come from the housing projects to this school. Attendance rates are like 60%. Reading scores are low. It's an elementary school. They don't have any black male teachers in the school. The school is like destined to fail. It received a D rating, so it was on the verge of being closed. He called the principal there and said, hey, I have these men, and what we would like to do is have breakfast with the kids. We'll call it Fatherhood Fridays, and we'll read to the kids. The principal said, come on in. When do you want to come? They go into the school, they read to the kids, and magic happens. What the principal noticed is that after these men were in the school and having breakfast with the kids, attendance went up. Kids were going to the library saying, hey, I want this book. I want to read this book. They were proud to read because they saw these men reading to them, and the men read back to them. This guy right here, gigantic. He's like 6'4", 6'5", but he was sitting in his little baby seat, and he was trying to read to this young man, And what I like at the end of the reading program, all the men get in a circle and they tell the kids how special they are and how important it is to keep reading. This kid up here doing push-ups in the corner, what you notice is that, because I went to Nashville to see it for myself, and when I got there, the kids wanted to impress these men because a lot of them didn't have their fathers in their lives. So it was just like, boys want to show their muscles and do all this kind of stuff, and they just wanted to impress these men so much. So boys started doing push-ups and sit-ups. I'm like, what are they doing? Jumping jacks? Like dancing? And so the men were like, no, let's just read. Impress me by reading. And they did. This program called Fatherhood Fridays costs no money. Why can't we do this here? Please, somebody tell me, why can't we do this here? It doesn't cost any money. So what I wanted to do was find programs that cost a little money, programs that cost a lot of money, a little money, and no money. And we can't do nothing. Nothing. That's why I'm still sick and tired. Okay. Actually want Mr. Pratt to come back here and actually do it and start going into the schools. But I got a feeling the schools will give them a hard time because MPS is not very inviting to parents and open to ideas of letting people from the outside come in because it may mess with their agenda and all this kind of stuff, and teachers may get upset and you don't want to upset principal, all that old silly stuff, when everybody needs to be a part of the solution. So this gets into the whole other idea that we need more black male teachers as well. One reason why Buena Vista let these black men come in, and they weren't just fraternity men, some of them were like, this guy is a lawyer right there. One guy was a police officer, there was a music teacher, there was a guy who worked in sanitation. They worked in all these different jobs and they came in their uniforms. And so I wanted to become a journalist because when I was in 7th grade, Greg Stanford came to my school during career day or career week, and he was a journalist. He was an editorial writer for the Milwaukee Journal. And I remember seeing him chew on his straw, and he was just talking. He was just so talking about all the people he met. He had this big old stomach. And he was talking about, I met the president, I met this person, I met that person, I wrote stories on this. And I was like, you met all these people? And I wanted to be a professional boxer at the time. And after talking to him and seeing him and having someone like him just talk to me about what he did for a career, I knew what I wanted to do right after that. I wanted to be a journalist. And when I came back from Harvard in 2008, Greg retired from the Journal, and I took his position as an editorial writer for the paper. This was 7th grade, and this is me in 2008 taking my mentor's job. That's how important programs like this are. But getting back to black male teachers are important because they not only help black students, they help white students as well. Studies have shown how attendance goes up, test scores go up, and all these things go up just because kids need to see that there's something different. And black men just bring a different kind of energy. I can't really explain it, but it's a different energy when they're in teaching positions. So I mentioned that, and then lastly, I want to talk about, how much time do I have, Sweet? Okay. Lastly, I want to talk about the issue of race, which is probably the biggest topic that you ever want to talk about. And I want to sum this up in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So we went to the George Floyd Memorial after he was killed, and it's a sight to see. And we all know what happened there. And we all know that we have a race problem in our city. We have a race problem in our nation. Let's be real. Hate crimes are up. You name it, there's divisions, and it really comes out in some of the nasty political ads that you see. It comes out when it comes out, you know it, right? So I heard about this program at the Y called Unlearning Racism. Unlearning Racism, right? When I first heard about this program, I'm like, what can they teach me about race, unlearning racism? What? I signed up for the program. An 8-week course to teach you how to become an ally to people of color and to give you the tools to learn about what's out there when it comes to racism. It's probably the best thing that I've ever taken in my life. When I first signed up, I got into the class, it was probably like about 40 people in the class. I was one of maybe 3 blacks in the class. The other people I would describe as woke white people. Somebody said that that's what they described themselves as. And the first class, it was like a history lesson. Like, how did we get to where we are today? What could be done to change it and stuff like that. Over the course of 8 weeks, you take various exercises, you do a lot of reading, you see a lot of videos, but the main thing you do is learn how to fight racism. And fighting racism is a full-time job. If you're a person of color, you do it all the time. You talk all the time about racism. But honestly, if you're not a person of color, you probably don't really think about it on the same level that we do. What this class taught a lot of people is that you have to be an ally for the people who are not in the room, right? Because you're often going to be in spaces that black people are not allowed. You're not going to be in the boardrooms. You're not going to be in these meetings. You probably don't have a lot of people of color that work at the jobs that you work at. I know I don't. I mean, still, I've been at the paper for 30 years, and I could name on one hand how many black writers we have. One hand. And we cover Milwaukee. You know, Gannett, our new owners, I probably shouldn't say this, but they have this program to hire more people of color, but I haven't seen it done yet, you know? And it's funny because when people call and express their concerns about issues going on in the community, they only call me. Like, that's one black guy we could call James, he could tackle it. It's very difficult to do. But I would encourage you all, if you ever want to learn or unlearn racism, please take Unlearning Racism. The class is too deep to even talk about in its full depth. But I told you I wanted to give you a homework assignment. This is the homework assignment. It's very simple. If you think any of these ideas should be done in Milwaukee or anywhere in the surrounding Milwaukee County area, raise your hand. Okay. What do you do to take that idea beyond a signing of a proclamation? This is what I need you to do. I need you to call the mayor. I need you to call the alderman, and chances are you won't get them because they never answer their phone. Call the alderman and just say, how come we're not doing the Cleveland Cooperative in Milwaukee? Well, we signed a proclamation. We're still looking at. No, don't give me that. We're still looking into it. Why aren't we doing it? It doesn't cost that much to get it started. Find out. See what they have to say. And the main thing is, don't just email them. Call them and put pressure on them, because I think they need to feel it from you. I could tell them all I want. I sent some of them the articles themselves. I sent it to them. Did you read this? Because a lot of them don't even read the paper. Yeah, that's true. A lot of them don't read the paper. So I sent it to them, said, hey, can we do this? And I don't want to hear that we ain't got no money. The most important thing to do is do the follow-up phone calls. Call them and find out, after you make a call 2 weeks after that. Did you do anything? Call 2 weeks after that. What's the update? Pester them. They need to be pestered. They got these positions making $80, $90, $100,000, and a lot of them are not giving us the service that we need. And with that, we're going to end it with I want you to hear the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, being sick and tired of being sick and tired. I told you, you got to be ready, honey. She forgot. Uh-oh. Now the pressure is on.
She was so enthralled by what you were saying.
Here we go. Hit the volume, huh?
Mr. Chairman,
Here we go.
and to the Credentials Committee. My name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Roosevelt, Mississippi. Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stinney. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Roosevelt, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Roosevelt, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that, said, if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Said, then if you go down and withdraw, said, you still might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him, said, I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you.
I just wanted you to hear her voice because Fannie Lou was a lady who got involved in the civil rights movement later in life. And she was one of the unsung heroes of the movement that a lot of us don't talk about enough. And I want to just end it with that. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm here.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Gabriel. If you have a question, please raise your hand and then wait till I get to you with the microphone so our online folks can hear too. Questions?
Do you get anywhere with the Greater Milwaukee Foundation or any of those people as opposed to city officials?
Say that. What was the question again? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Do I get anywhere with the Greater Milwaukee? Well, actually, the Greater Milwaukee Foundation has sponsored several of my projects, so we're pretty much on the same page with a lot of things that's going on. One thing I will say, though, like the Cleveland Cooperative idea, when that idea came to place, it took them like roughly 2 or 3 years to agree to come up with this Cleveland Cooperative idea. So you had the mayor invited all the bigwigs to the table. Hey, I need the Cleveland clinics to come to the table. I need you to come to the table. All these big organizations to come to the table. And he said, what can we do to change the trajectory of what's happening in Cleveland? How can we like let our guards down? So the first 6 months or 8 months, you know, I don't trust you, you don't trust me, I don't want to share my secrets. And so it was a little bit of that. But then the mayor and someone like the Greater Milwaukee Foundation was a philanthropic group got involved, and they said, look, put all that stuff to the side. Nobody's going to steal anybody's ideas and all this kind of stuff. What can we do with this $3 billion of dollars that we're shipping out of Cleveland on a yearly basis? How can we take a portion of that, invest it into like these three main ideas, and help that grow and help the citizens right here in Cleveland? And you know who really pushed the Cleveland Cooperative idea? Young people. Young people today have such a big voice. They come to a company, they don't want to just work for that company and go home. They want this company to be vested in communities that they live in. And they want these companies to be held accountable if they don't do the work that they say that they're going to do. How can you be the Cleveland hospitals, but the people who are suffering from trauma and gunshot wounds and all these kind of things that they live with every single day in these violent communities, you're not looking out for their best interests. You're just going to patch them up when they come in and ship them back out to these rough neighborhoods. They have to be more vested. And so that's what makes this program so special. And that's why we should be doing it here. Freighter should be at the table. Aurora should be at the table. The Helen Bader should be at the table. And all these people, and the mayor should be the one to cultivate that meeting. And they should have to keep meeting until they come up with some ideas to address some of the issues that we have here. But I'm not a politician, so I just write about it.
Questions?
Could you talk a little bit more about the $160,000 you said it would take to start this program?
Yeah. So the $160,000 roughly would be for the city to make the initial investment into the organizer who started the Cleveland Cooperative, who my wife and I, we met with this guy. He's the brains behind it all. So he would come to Milwaukee and say, he would identify the people who should be at the table, right? And he said, okay, I could do that part for you. You don't even have to do that part. Let me do that part. I'll bring them to the table. I'll get them the blueprint of how we do things, have them talk about it, and then you guys step in. So that's what the $160,000 investment would be. He would do like the leg work to make sure everybody comes to the table that needs to be at the table. And we can't even seem to do that part. I think what we were thinking in Milwaukee that we don't need them for that part. We could do that part ourselves, but it never happened.
Questions?
My name is James Matthew, and thank you for the powerful presentation.
Thank you.
You had mentioned about a class that you took about how to fight racism. Can you tell us where to take that class and how to register for it?
Yes, it's called Unlearning Racism, and it's offered by the Y. And what they do is they offer it in different ways. You can either take it to class individually and go down to the Y for an 8-week course, and they meet like once a week. And you meet once a week, and it's like 3 hours. Or they could offer like abbreviated classes where they come to you. Like they'll come to a group, like they could come to this church, and they could give you like a 3-hour crash course or something like, yes? Oh.
Bay Bridge, which is an organization in Whitefish Bay, and one of our co-founders is right here. We are bringing Unlearning Racism to, unfortunately, the Whitefish Bay Rec Department would not take it on.
Uh-oh.
But Nicolay is willing to take that on, and so we are setting that up for possibly March or April. It's just in the works, so watch for that. We'll try to get that info out to your church specifically, too.
Thank you. There you go.
My father worked at A.O. Smith for a long, long time.
How clean is the ground?
That's a good question. The city invested over $30 million into cleaning up the area. And it looks fantastic, but people who worked there a long time said, you have no idea how much stuff we buried on that land. Because let me tell you what A.O. Smith was. A.O. Smith was like an entity to itself. They were generating so many workers worked there. They were making so many car parts and doing all this stuff. And there was so much land there, you know, oil and all this garbage. Dig a hole and dump it in that hole. Cover it up and keep it moving. That's how they operated. So it was a lot of stuff that I don't think, this stuff buried so deep, I don't think we ever get to it. I'll put it to you like that. But yeah, they got away with a lot of stuff, but the city put like $30 million into the cleanup. Like I said, it looks fantastic. I drive past it every day, but I think right now, I know what they did have there. They had Talgo making the trains there at one time. And remember, we were going with these high-speed rail trains until Scott Walker said, nah, we ain't doing that because they're not fast enough or something like that. But what that did, that crippled what could have been very popular and turned that back into a bustling business, because had they allowed those trains to be built there, it would have bridged the gap between Milwaukee and Madison, Milwaukee and other areas. And it would have also just generated really high-paying jobs. And because a train didn't go like 100 miles per hour, we said no. That was a conversation that should not have happened. And you know what? The trains are being sold to Africa right now. So the trains were still being built, but this African company bought those trains and they're going to use them. So it's good enough for them, but not good enough for the citizens of Milwaukee. I always had a problem with that. Question.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And I think I read the part about the Cleveland Cooperative because I remember researching it a little more after you had written on it. And I understand that that's a city-owned site, but I'm wondering, because a lot of us are suburban residents, mm-hmm. and so we don't really elect the aldermen, but the county supervisors need to answer to us as our elected officials. Do you think there's any role that the county can play in that conversation? Yes, the county plays a huge role, but you know, I will say this, there was a lot of residents that didn't live in Milwaukee who were speaking out against the Strauss company being built there. Those people we never seen before. It was like, you need to talk into a mic.
Hi. What happened with Strauss is that people who were vegetarian and vegan decided that we shouldn't have that in our area. And we literally live 6 blocks from the A.O. Smith site. We live 6 blocks. They came in, we don't want a slaughterhouse, it's inhumane, it's all of these things. And they put pressure on, and I've not seen any of those people anywhere in our neighborhood ever again. But it was a vegan and vegetarian organization that said no, that we shouldn't have it. And our alderperson caved.
That part.
Questions?
And there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, let's go with something different. But if you go with something different, you better have a backup plan. You know, chain smokers, they'll do like this, get that last cigarette out, but then they think about it like, I need to go get another pack. So they get another pack before they smoke that last cigarette. So what I'm saying is, if you kill an idea, you better have a better idea to follow up on. Don't have no idea. And what's happened is that our alderman killed this idea, but he didn't have no backup plan. So as a result, it's still empty there. That's irresponsible. But I'm not a politician. I'm not a politician.
More questions? Well, let's all join in thanking you for
thank you.
Awesome talk.
Thank you. Thank you. That was tremendous. Thank you.